Okay, Hare Krishna. We are midway through chapter 5, entitled The War. Oh, it's exciting. Yeah, entitled The War. And so we've just been hearing about the end of Prabhupada's guru's life at the end of the previous chapter, and what happened with his institution and his organization. And then Calcutta's getting bombed, Prabhupada's translating books in the middle of a war zone, and all sorts of things are happening. So we're going to endeavor to finish this chapter, see how Prabhupada sees out the war. Okay, we'll sing the Mangala Charanam prayers before we start. Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Yananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Vena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakambitam Sja He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishapanu Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Paschatadizattarine Hare Krishna. Okay, chapter 5. Would you like to start reading?
Yeah, okay. In the midst of these calamities, Abai felt more than ever the need to propagate Krishna consciousness. He had something to say to the war-weary citizens of the world, and he longed for a more effective forum, a publication of some kind, a way to present the world's crises through the eyes of Scripture in the same bold style as had his spiritual master. There was no shortage of ideas, and he had been saving money from his business for this very purpose. Yet how could he dare produce such a journal when even learned sannyasis, senior disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, were not? He never considered himself a great scholar among his godbrothers. Although they called him Kavi, and now Bhaktivedanta, as a Grihasta, he wasn't expected to take the lead or publish his own journal. But times had changed. The English journal, The Harmonist, had not been published since before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's passing away. Now almost a decade had passed, and the Gaudiya Mat had been too busy fighting in court to consider preaching. Long gone was the tireless spirit that for 10 consecutive years had produced the daily Nadia Prakash. No longer were 4 separately located printing presses pumping out transcendental literature under the direction of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's empowered son. The presses had been sold by Kunja Vihari. Times had changed. The Gaudiya Mat was only fighting, while the non-devotees were killing each other in a world war. From his front room at 6 Sitakanta Banerjee, Abai conceived, wrote, edited, and typed the manuscript for a magazine. He designed a logo, a long rectangle across the top of the page. In the upper left-hand corner was a figure of Lord Chaitanya, effulgent with rays of light like rays from the sun. In the lower right were silhouettes of a crowd of people, in darkness, but groping to receive light from Lord Chaitanya. And between Lord Chaitanya and the people, their title unfurled like a banner, Back to Godhead. In the lower right corner was a picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati seated at his writing, looking up thoughtfully as he composed. Above the logo ran the motto, Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no nescience. Below the logo were the following lines, edited and founded under the direct order of His Divine Grace Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada by Mr. Abhay Charan De. Abhay had already gained some printing experience in connection with his business, and after completing the manuscript, he brought it to Saraswati Press, the best printers in Bengal. He also hired an agent, Calcutta's prestigious booksellers, Thacker, Spink and Company, who would take responsibility for distributing the journal to bookstores and libraries, including outlets in several foreign countries. But when he went to buy paper, he met with government restrictions. Because of the war and the subsequent paper shortage, they wanted to assay what he had written in terms of the national needs. During this time of world crisis, an ordinary citizen's religious newspaper was hardly top priority. Abhai's request for paper was perfunctorily denied, but he persisted. He appealed that using paper to print the teachings of the personality of Godhead was not a waste and not untimely in the present troubled atmosphere. Finally, he obtained permission to print his first edition of Back to Godhead, a 44-page publication. Abhay Charan greeted his readers by defining his motto, Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. When man forgets that he is the son of Godhead and identifies himself with the body, then he's in ignorance. He's like a man who's very concerned with the automobile's mechanism, yet with no knowledge of the driver. The defect of the present-day civilization is just like that. This is actually the civilization of nescience or illusion, and therefore civilization has been turned into a militarization. Everyone is fully concerned with the comforts of the body and everything related with the body, and no one is concerned with the spirit that moves the body, although even a boy can realize that the motor car mechanism has little value if there is no driver of the car. This dangerous ignorance of humanity is a gross nescience and has created a dangerous civilization in the form of militarization. This militarization, which in softer language is nationalization, is an external barrier to understanding human relations. There is no meaning in a fight where the parties do fight only for the matter of different colored dresses. There must be, therefore, an understanding of human relation without any consideration of the bodily designation or colored dresses. Back to Godhead is a feeble attempt by the undersigned under the direction of His Divine Grace, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, the celebrated founder and organizer of the Gaudiya Mat activities, just to bring up a real relation of humanity with central relation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That there is a great and urgent need of a literature like this is keenly felt by the leaders of all countries, and the following statements will help much in the procedure. It was 1944, and Abai specifically addressed the crisis of world war. The world's political leaders were expressing their disgust at their people's suffering and scarcity. After 4 years of fighting, costing millions of human lives, the Second World War within 20 years was still scourging the earth. Although the end was in sight, leaders expressed not so much happiness and hope as weariness and uncertainty. Even if this war ended, would there be yet another war? Had man not yet grasped the vital lesson of how to live in peace? Abai quoted the Archbishop of India. India, guided by God, can lead the world back to sanity. He quoted the President of the United States. A program, therefore, of moral rearmament of the world cannot fail to lessen the dangers of armed conflict. Such moral rearmament, to be most highly effective, must receive support on a worldwide basis. He mentioned former President Herbert Hoover, who had affirmed that the world needs to return to moral and spiritual ideals, and he quoted a resolution by the British House of Commons affirming that spiritual principles are the common heritage of all people, and that men and nations urgently need to acknowledge the sovereignty of God. He quoted Wendell Willkie, who, after his return from Russia, had reported millions of Russians killed, wounded, or missing in the war, and millions more suffering from a winter of terrible scarcity and subjugation. What is true for the Russian people, Abai wrote, is also true for other people, and we Indians are feeling the same scarcity, the same want, and the same disgust. He quoted Britain's Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, who had been filled with lamentation and indignation at the miseries of war. He quoted the Archbishop of Canterbury.
The Archbishop said, "In every quarter of earth, men long to be delivered from the curse of war, and to find in a world which has regained its peace, respite from the harshness and bitterness of the world they have known till now. But so often they want the kingdom of heaven without its king, the kingdom of God without God, and they cannot have it. Our resolve must be back to God. We make plans for the future, for peace amongst the nation and for civil security at home. That is quite right enough, and it would be wrong to neglect it. But all our plans will come to shipwreck on the rock of human selfishness unless we turn to God. Back to God, that is the chief need of England and of every nation." He also quoted Sir Francis Younghusband of Britain. "Now that religion is everywhere attacked brutally, we look to India, the very home of religion, for a sign." And finally, he quoted Sir Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. "This war, when it would be won, would prove to be the breeding ground of other wars if the peace was not saved. It could happen only if powerful nations ceased to take pride and glory in their possessions, which were based on labor and tribute of other weaker nations." This perhaps was what Sir Harcourt Butler meant when he said that the principles of Hinduism contain the essential elements for the saving of world civilizations. And in another quote from Dr. Radhakrishnan, Abai offered a statement he had also used as one of the mottos of the magazine. "We have to defeat tyranny in the realm of thought and create a will for world peace. Instruments for training the mind and educating human nature should be used to develop a proper social outlook, without which institutional machinery was of little use." Abai expressed his confidence that the spiritual resources of India could be used by everyone, not only to enhance the glory of India, but to benefit the whole world. Next, he told how he had come to begin Back to Godhead magazine, how he had written a letter 2 weeks before the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and how his spiritual master had instructed him to preach in English. Under the circumstances since 1936 up to now, I was simply speculating whether I shall venture this difficult task, and that without any means and capacity. But as none have discouraged me, I have now taken courage to take up the work. But at the present moment, my conscience is dictating me to take up the work, although the difficulties are not over for the present situation arising out of war conditions. Abai stated that his paper would contain only the transcendental messages of the great sages of India, especially Lord Chaitanya, and that his duty would be simply to repeat them, just like a translator. He would not manufacture anything, and so his words would descend as transcendental sound for guiding people back to Godhead. He admitted that the subject matters of Back to Godhead, being from a totally different sphere of consciousness, might seem dry to his readers, but he held that anyone who actually gave attention to his message would benefit. Sugar candy is never sweet to those who are suffering from the disease of the bile, but still, sugar candy is the medicine for bilious patients. The taste of sugar candy will gradually be revived if the bilious patient goes on taking sugar candy regularly for the cure of the disease. We recommend the same process to the readers of Back to Godhead. Abai focused on presenting the timeless message of the Vedas, but in the context of current crises. In his essay, Godhead and His Potentialities, he presented Vedic evidence and logical arguments to explain the transcendental nature of Godhead and the individual souls, both being deathless, blissful, and full of knowledge. Because men have forgotten and neglected their vital connection with God, they can never be satisfied in the material world, which is temporary and beset with unavoidable miseries. As spiritual souls, everyone is eternal by nature, and therefore everyone tries to avoid the onslaught of the stresses and dangers which come one after another. But the material body is meant for suffering and ultimately for destruction. The exodus of the residents of Calcutta to other places out of fear of being raided by the Japanese bombs is due to the same tendency of non-destructible existence. But those who are thus going away do not remember that even after going away from Calcutta, saved from the raids of the Japanese bombs, they are unable to protect their bodies as non-destructible in any part of the material universe, when the same bodies will be raided by the bombs of material nature in the form of threefold miseries. The Japanese also, who are threatening the Calcutta people with ruthless air raids for increasing their own happiness by possession of lands, do not know that their happiness is also temporary and destructible, as they have repeatedly experienced in their own fatherland. The living beings, on the other hand, who are so designed to be killed, are by nature eternal, impenetrable, invisible, etc. So all those living entities who are threatened to be killed, as well as those who are threatening to conquer, are all alike in the grip of the Maya potency, and are therefore in the darkness. So if anyone else wants to read a little bit.
I can read a bit.
Great. Thank you.
Abai wrote that never by their own devices could men escape the conditions of destruction. So many world leaders were seeking relief from the war, but all were useless because their attempts for peace were within the material conception of life. Their attempts were like attempts to alleviate darkness with darkness, but darkness can be removed only by light. Without light, any amount of speculation of the human mind, which is also a creation of the material nature, can never restore the living entities to permanent happiness. In that darkness, any method of bringing peace in the world can bring only temporary relief or distress, as we can see from all creations of the external potency. In the darkness, non-violence is as much useless as violence, while in the light there is no need of violence or non-violence. Abai did not deal exclusively with the war. In Theosophy Ends in Vaishnavism, he criticized the shortcomings of the fashionable ideas of Theosophy, which the followers of Madame Blavatsky had popularized in India. In congregational chanting, he upheld the scriptural prediction that the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya would spread to every town and village on the surface of the earth. From this foretelling, we can hope that the cult of Sankirtan will take very shortly a universal form of religious movement. And this universal religion, wherein there is no harm in chanting the name of the Lord, nor is there any question of quarrel, will continue for years, as we can know from the pages of authoritative scriptures. The central theme of Back to Godhead was clearly the order of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. In its cover, with its picture of a thoughtful Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, in its dedication, in its statement of the magazine's purpose, in its handling of issues, its analysis of theosophy, its prediction of the spread of Sankirtan, in its every aspect, the theme of Back to Godhead was the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. There were also 4 shorter essays by other contributors, including Bhaktisaranga Goswami. An advertisement on the back cover highlighted Gita Upanishad by Abhay Churande, editor and founder, Back to Godhead, in 3 parts, 1,200 pages, royal size, first-class Morocco binding. An elaborate exposition of the world-famous Hindu philosophy, the Bhagavad Gita, in its true scientific theistic interpretations by the chain of disciplic succession from Sri Krishna, Rama, Narada, Vyasa, Madhva, Madhavendra, Puri, Iswara, Lord Chaitanya, Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Krishna Das, Narottama, Vishwanath, Baladeva, Jagannath, Thakur Bhaktivinoda, Gaur Kishore, Thakur Siddhanta Sarasvati, down to the author, with numerous illustrations in colours and plain from many authentic scriptures. To be published shortly, customers booked in advance. Price 18 Indian rupees, foreign £1, 10 shillings, I suppose. And a second major work, Lord Chaitanya, in 2 parts, totaling 1,000 pages. Neither of these manuscripts was actually near completion, but Abai was expressing his eagerness to undertake such large works on behalf of his spiritual master. In attempting to print the second issue of Back to Godhead, Abai encountered the same difficulty as before. Twice he requested permission to purchase newsprint, and twice the government denied his request. Paper was restricted on account of the war. On July the 10th, 1944, Abai wrote a 3rd letter. With due respect, I beg to submit that under the instruction of His Divine Grace, Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Maharaj, the spiritual head of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, I had to start a paper under the caption Back to Godhead. The very name will suggest the intention of starting such a paper in the midst of heavy turmoil through which the world is now passing. A copy of the same booklet is sent herewith for your kind perusal. In that booklet, you shall find strong world opinions even by many reputed politicians all over the world, in favour of such a movement to bring back the world into sanity by training the mind and educating human nature for the unshaken spiritual plane, considered to be the supreme need of humankind. I hope you will kindly go through the paper by making some time, and I may draw your attention especially to the introductory portion. Abhay also remarked that the editorial board of Back to Godhead felt that there was not so much a scarcity of paper as a scarcity of education. Taking the opportunity to preach, Abhay explained that although the ultimate supplier was the personality of Godhead, godless men consider themselves the proprietors of all things. Would anyone else like to read?
Where are we? Is that Abhay conceded?
Catastrophe that is now in vogue.
Right, okay. Catastrophe that is now in vogue in the present war of supremacy is guided by this false sense of proprietorship, and therefore there is need of making propaganda amongst all human beings in order to bring them back to the sense of the ultimate proprietorship of Godhead. Abhay conceded that there might indeed be a paper shortage in India, but in ancient times, he wrote, enlightened Indians had regularly sacrificed tons of valuable ghee and grains in the fire during religious sacrifices. And in those times, there had not been any scarcity. People now, however, having abandoned all sacrifices to the Supreme Lord, were producing only scarcity. Can we not therefore sacrifice a few reams of paper in the midst of many wastages for the same purpose in order to derive greater benefit for the humankind? I request that the government should take up this particular case in the light of spiritualism, which is not within the material calculation. Even in Great Britain, the government has immensely supported a similar movement called the moral rearmament movement, without consideration of the scarcity of paper, which is more acute there than here. Let there be a page only, if not more, for the publication of Back to Godhead, for which we do not mind, but my earnest request is that the government should at least let there be ventilation of the atmosphere for which my paper, Back to Godhead, is meant. Kindly, therefore, give it a serious consideration and allow me to start even by one page every weekly or monthly, as you think best, without thinking it as an ordinary waste of paper, for the sake of humanity and Godhead. The letter was successful. Now, with veiled sarcasm, he headlined the second issue, "Thanks to the Government of India." He informed his readers, many of whom had been disappointed to learn that the government had curtailed his printing, that he would be able to continue his magazine every month. Abhay printed his letter to the government paper officer and also the reply granting his permission. His articles were shorter, this time displaying the flair of a news columnist, as with philosophical criticism, verve, and a touch of ironic humour. He commented on world leaders and crises. Gandhi Jinnah talks, Mr. Churchill's Humane World, Mr. Bernard Shaw's Wishful Desire, and Spontaneous Love of Godhead comprised the issue. Gandhi Jinnah talks. We are sorry to learn that Gandhi Jinnah talks about unity in the Indian people have failed for the present. Abhay was not very optimistic about the results of such occasional talks between several heads of communities. Even if they made a successful solution, it would break up and take the shape of another problem. They were looking for unity between Muslims and Hindus, but in Europe, the fighting parties were Christians, and in Asia, they were mostly Buddhists, but still they were fighting. So fighting will go on between Hindu and Mohammedan, between Hindus and Hindus, or between Mohammedan and Mohammedan, between Christians and Christians, and between Buddhist and Buddhist, till the day of annihilation. As long as there was the contaminated self-interest of sense gratification, there would be fighting between brother and brother, father and son, and nation and nation. Real unity would stand only on a plane of transcendental service to the Supreme. Mahatma Gandhi, Abai wrote, is far above ordinary human being, and we have all respects for him. But Abai advised Gandhi to give up his activities on the material plane and rise to the transcendental plane of the spirit. Then there could be talks about the unity of all people. Abai cited Bhagavad Gita's definition of a Mahatma, one who concentrates his attention on the service of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. He requested Mahatma Gandhi to adhere to the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and preach its message of surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. In this way, Mahatma Gandhi, through his influential position in the world, could bring about universal relief simply by preaching the message of Bhagavad Gita. Mr. Churchill's Humane World. We are pleased to find that leaders of world politics, such as Mr. Churchill, have nowadays begun to think of a humane world and trying to get rid of the terrible national frenzy of hate. The frenzy of hatred is another side of the frenzy of love. The frenzy of love of Hitler's own countrymen has produced the concomitant frenzy of hatred for others, and the present war is the result of such dual side of the frenzy called love and hatred. So when we wish to get rid of the frenzy of hate, we must be prepared to get rid of the frenzy of so-called love. This position of equilibrium, free from love and hatred, is attained only when men are sufficiently educated. Until men were educated to see the soul within the body, the dual frenzy of love and hate would continue, and a humane world would not be possible. This introspection, Abai concluded, is easily attained by the service of Godhead. So Mr. Churchill's humane world implies that we must go back to Godhead. Mr. Bernard Shaw's wishful desire. Mr. Bernard Shaw has congratulated Mahatma Gandhi on the occasion of the latter's 76th birthday in the following words: I can only wish this were Mr. Gandhi's 35th birthday instead of his 76th. We heartily join with Mr. Shaw in his attempt to subtract 41 years from the present age of Mahatma Gandhi. But death does not respect our wishful desire. Neither Mr. Shaw nor Mahatma Gandhi nor any other great personality have ever been able to solve the problem of death. The leaders of nations have opened many factories for manufacturing weapons for the art of killing, but none has opened a factory to manufacture weapons for protecting man from the cruel hands of death, although our wishful desire is always not to die. Men were preoccupied with the problem of how to get bread, although this problem was actually solved by nature. Man should try to solve the problem of death. Bhagavad Gita tells the problem of death can be solved. Although death is everywhere in the material world, one who attains to me, says Krishna, never has to take his birth again in the material world. There is a spiritual world, non-destructible, and one who goes there does not come back to the region of death. Why should the leaders of nations cling to the planet of their birth, where death is inevitable? Abai concluded, we wish that in their ripe old age, Mr. Shaw and Mahatma Gandhi will make combined effort to educate men to learn how to go back home, back to Godhead. After 2 issues of Back to Godhead, Abai had to stop. Printing was costly, but he kept writing regularly, working at Gita Upanishad, turning out new articles and philosophical purports on the scriptures, even in the same book in which he wrote his pharmaceutical formulas. I'll pass the baton on. Okay, yeah, someone else wants to take over?
Yeah, sure, I'll go. One night, Abe had an unusual dream. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta appeared before him. Weakening, he was asking Abe to leave home and take sannyasa. Abe awoke in an intensely emotional state. How horrible, he thought. He knew it was not an ordinary dream, yet the request seemed so difficult and unlikely. Take sannyasa. At least it was not something he could do immediately. Now he had to improve the business, and with the profits he would print books. He went on with his duties but remained shaken by the dream. In 1945, the war over and India still in turmoil under British rule, Abe saw a good opportunity to make his business more successful. In Lucknow, 600 miles from Kolkata, he rented a building and opened his own factory, Abe Charandi and Sons. It was a major investment, requiring 40,000 rupees to start, and he began on a larger scale than ever before. Also, according to the law, to ensure that he was not dealing in the black market or misusing chemicals, he had to employ 3 government inspectors. Yet, despite a high overhead, he established a good market and his products were in demand. He closed his small operation in Kolkata and concentrated on the Lucknow business. Although the building was known locally to be haunted by ghosts, Abe had not been deterred. But when he began his operations, some of the workers came to him frightened. Bubble, bubble, there's a ghost. Abe then went through the entire building chanting Hare Krishna, and after that there were no more complaints of ghosts. On November 13th, Abe wrote to his servant Gauranga, mentioning some of his difficulties in Lucknow and asking him to come there to help. In this letter, Abe spoke bitterly of his wife, Radharani, and children. Gaurangu Prabhu, please accept my obeisances. I received your letter dated 7th. Due to a lack of time, I could not reply in time. I stay here alone with some servants. If I leave now, I have to close everything down. Due to my leaving once and closing the business, I have lost about 10,000 rupees, and the goodwill has also been affected and my enemies have increased. That is why I'm fighting, practically staking my whole life. I am staying here alone in the middle of so many difficulties, not for nothing. That's why I was writing to you repeatedly to come here. As soon as you receive this letter, to show it to Dubra, take at least 10 rupees from him and come here. When you come here, I will make arrangements to send money to your home. What's the point in holding you back with an excuse that there is no servant or maidservant? I try to serve them enough by keeping servants, maidservants, and cooks, but up until today, they have not become attached to devotional service. So I am no more interested about those affairs. When you come here, then I will go to Calcutta. If I see that they are interested about devotional service, then only will I remain my establishment here. Otherwise, I will not maintain them anymore. Bring a quilt for me. Yours, Abe. The two interests, family and preaching, were conflicting. Radharani had never shown any interest in back to Godhead. She seemed to work against the enthusiasm both for publishing and for earning. The business was called Abe Charandi and Sons, and yet the sons were disciplined to help. And when he had called for his servant to join him in Lucknow, the family had objected, saying they needed Gauranga more there. What was the use? The family was interested neither in backing him in his business nor in taking up the life of devotional service. And since his business was primarily an outcome of his family life, he resented that he had to give it so much of his energy. It was the old economic law by Marshall that he had learned in college. Without family affection, a man's economic interest is weakened. Of course, there could be a compatible balance between family service and devotional service. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had described two simultaneous obligations, bodily and spiritually. Social status, mental development, cleanliness, nourishment, and the struggle of existence were all bodily obligations. The activities of devotional service to Krishna were spiritual, and to should parallel one another. In Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life, his family was a source of spiritual encouragement, and he used his social position to advance his preaching. But Abey's experience had been different. The two paths seemed to be at war, each threatening the other's existence. He felt himself operating somewhat like the materialist he had criticized in his writings, absorbed in the struggle for the existence, with insufficient time for self-realization. Although his family made more and more demands of him, he was feeling less inclined to work for them, and more inclined to preach Krishna consciousness. It was a predicament. He could only push and delinquently support his family, expand his business, and hope for a great success so that he could revive his publishing. But the Lucknow factory seemed almost beyond his means. He had purposely begun on a larger scale with the aim of making a larger profit. But monthly expenses were high. He had fallen behind in his rent, and now he was involved in a court case with the landlord. Although he was visiting Kolkata regularly and shipping raw materials from Kolkata to Lucknow daily, he was always found his family members in Kolkata uncooperative. His servant Gauranga was also reluctant to work as Abey required and was thinking of going back to live with his family. Abey again wrote to Gauranga on the 23rd, offering my humble obeisances and at the feet of Vaishnava. Gauranga Prabhu, I have received your postcard dated 18th November 1945 and got all the information. There is no need to come here just for a month after spending the money and then go back. For the present, take 25 rupees from Dubra and go home. Write a letter to me after your arrival, then I will send the rest of your money in 1 or 2 installments by money order. Then from there, you let me know when can you come here. I've started my work here in fairly big scale. You have seen that with your own eyes. So if there is no income, you will spend for a court integration. Everything is on my head. The brother and sons are just eating and sleeping like a bunch of females. I'm breaking the axe on my head. You go home as soon as you get the money and try to come back as soon as possible. Yours, Sri Abey Chanadi. Thank you. So would like someone to take over. I'm sorry for the background noise.
No problem. Kavi, thank you, Prabhu. It's wonderful. We're at the end of the chapter, so this is, I think, where we plan to finish anyway. So perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so time for comments and reflections that anyone has. Haribol.
Yeah, I was quite inspired by the bodily dress, like the dress with different colours relating to the different races, and kind of like quite timely with world politics as they are at the moment. So I was thinking, like, trying to formulate some sort of poetic analogy or something that I could maybe use about spirituality being one solution, at least one anyway. Just have to see how it goes. But yeah, I may just write it and not post it anywhere, because it's sometimes more hassle than it's worth. I get leapt upon by people of various political leanings or whatever. So, but yeah, I've been inspired anyway, just to be the bodily dress of different colours and maybe different qualities and things like that. So that's my 2 pence worth.
Brilliant. Thanks, Prabhu. Yeah, I've also found that out. Sometimes you spend more time justifying something that you write than you do actually writing it. You sort of wonder, is it really worth it? So yeah, I've had one or two instances where I've really regretted posting something on Facebook, and I thought, actually, I'm just going to try and keep quiet now. Do my best. Yeah, but I know our spiritual master wrote. I don't know if he wrote to us or if he was saying in a class or something that there's that image of, the changing bodies image. really famous painting, which has been sort of recreated in different ways. But he was saying someone should make one of these, but with different coloured bodies. So we're kind of working on that at the moment, trying to make some. In case anyone doesn't know, it's this painting of, there'll be like a baby body
sign at the top.
Yeah, there's like a baby's body, a toddler's body, young boy, teenage boy, young man, middle age, and like that. And all the different bodies are painted next to each other, and you can see the soul passing through all the different.
And the animals as well. And
yeah, and then the body gets old, and then it dies, and then there's a skeleton on the floor, and then in the distance there's another baby, and the cycle continues, and it's the same soul passing through all the different bodies. It's a really brilliant painting. And I know I had a neighbor. There's a kind of, I think you call it like a kind of relief sculpture or something. There's like a kind of like almost 3D sort of like diorama kind. I think it's called a relief sculpture in the window of Soho Street Temple. And one of my neighbours in Brighton said he used to travel with his friends from the East End of London all the way to Soho to go and look at that, because they thought it was really far out. They used to travel across and go and go, wow, it's really, So it's a really powerful image. But that idea of then adding, in the current climate, adding different colours.
Yeah, it's never had a diverse range of bodies presented in that image.
Yeah. So we're trying to figure that out. Yeah. I don't know about anyone else. We were laughing through quite a lot of that, because Prabhupada's really funny, right? It's like he's
This is about taking 41, 43 years?
41 years.
Yeah, 41 years.
I can only wish, we heartily join with Mr. Shaw in his attempt to subtract 41 years from the present age of Mahatma Gandhi. Like he's talking to George Bernard Shaw, he's like this big guy.
Sick burn.
Yeah, and Prabhupada's basically, as far as the world's concerned, Prabhupada is like a pharmacist, some like pharmacist with a wife and a few kids from Calcutta.
When he says thanks to the Indian
government,
because they've like given him a bit of paper.
Sarcastic thing. And it's sort of that. I mean, we were just cracking up, right, reading it. That he's got a brilliant sense of humour, and then there's one brilliant letter Prabhupada writes when he says something like what does he say? I think he says, I speak like a lion. He's explaining to his disciples why his preaching is so, and Prabhupada just called out everyone, not for the sake of it, but when someone was talking nonsense, the scientists claim to know everything and they obviously don't, and politicians, Prabhupada called them out and he said, I speak like a lion in one of his letters because I know no one can defeat me. Because he's heard from because he knows that his guru is like, not because Prabhupada's puffed up, but because he's listened to his guru and he's just following his guru's instruction. He's like protected by So here it's like the same sort of vibe. He's just having a go at everyone because he can, but not in a kind of like aggressive way, but he's calling everybody out. And he's very empowered to sort of do it. Whereas if other people did it, they'd soon. Sorry, Prabhu.
I say it's got firm faith in the Vedic conclusion, the Vedanta. So
and if anyone else did it for different reasons, they'd probably get bitten. But Prabhupada can do it, and he's totally safe.
It's not coming from an egotistical place.
Yeah. He's saying it's not really him speaking. I suppose that's the thing. It's not really him speaking. And I also particularly I thought I liked that. He's talking about Churchill and Hitler and Gandhi and all these like really big personalities with big problems, and he kind of cuts through all of it there was one part at the start. It's really nice to hear Prabhupada's earliest, like his first ever writings, but he cuts through all of it and just explains basically, like I think like Mahamantra was saying about different dresses. And it's just the whole thing's a nonsense. And he suddenly sort of comes in from this. You can imagine the sort of chatter of everybody you know, in Calcutta and elsewhere, it's all talking about the politics of a situation or the economics of a situation, or you know, all these different things. Prabhupada seems to sort of come in from this completely different angle and just kind of cuts all of it down in one stroke by saying, actually, it's not to do with that, it's to do with one's consciousness and identifying with the body. And I thought, wow, it's like so powerful, you know, really. Yeah.
So I thought it was good. Like he was quoting different people, and like he had quite wide knowledge of all different personalities, and was able to sort of extract things that they'd said that were relevant. The
one about from the Archbishop of Canterbury, we use that all the time.
Yeah.
It's great. We always tell people about it. I've always thought that. It's a great line. The kingdom of God without its king.
Yeah.
The kingdom of God without its king. Great. Yeah. Hare Krishna. I don't know if anyone else has anything they wanted to contribute.
I thought it was just amazing, his resilience, and he was so determined to follow the instruction of his guru that even at a very difficult time when it was hard to get hold of printing paper and everything like this, he still went ahead with it, wrote a few letters before he was successful, and all this, you know, it's just yeah, I find that incredibly inspiring that he was like that. Yeah, I also like the fact that he said thank you to the government as well. I was laughing at that bit. I think there was a little bit of humour in that, and also a little bit of sincerity as well, you know. So yeah, I liked it. I did like it a lot. Yeah, incredible what one can achieve, you know, when you've got full confidence and assurance, and you realise that Krishna is there guiding you like that. You know, he had complete faith, didn't he? Yeah, incredible.
I was just thinking also, what one bit we were laughing at was when he has the dream where his guru appears to him, and says to take sannyas, which is actually really like a pivotal moment in the whole story. But it says something sort of along the lines of, well, at least it wasn't something he had to do now. It was like, what? I've got his guru tells me in a dream he's got to take sannyas. He's like, okay, well, at least I haven't got to do it now. I'll shelve that one for a bit. That's a bit heavy, you know. It's like it's a bit far out. I'll put that one on the back burner for a bit, but okay. But yeah, it's very amazing that, I mean, he said many times, Prabhupada, that I've never been alone, and my guru is always with me in my heart. So he's obviously just, you know, feeling like that. But yeah, his persistence and determination are just incredible, you know. And
I think also his it's the beginning of his preaching style kind of improving. He's talking about world of events and kind of getting people's attention by talking about things they know, but obviously from a different perspective. So I think it's the beginning of him developing that through his publications.
Yeah. And that's also a theme. The first book that Prabhupada wrote was Easy Journey to Other Planets, and it's based on the space race that was going on with like America and Russia and things like that. So he was very much into that, explaining how it's relevant to our lives now. It's not some sort of antiquated thing or archaic or whatever. It's actually very relevant now, and it gets more and more relevant as Kali Yuga sort of rolls on. And it's, again, I think we say it every week, but it's amazing when you read it and you see those, or perhaps it's just me that says it every week, but you see the parallels that are going on between what Prabhupada's going through then and what's happening in the world now.
Still completely relevant.
So fresh and relevant, you know, and it's like, I don't know, that's 80 years ago, I think, what we're reading. It's about 80 odd years ago. But yeah, very powerful, very simple, but really, really powerful. Yeah. Jai. Hare Krishna. I don't know if anyone has any last offerings, or we'll pick it up next week as the plot thickens.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Bye.
Bye.